another Adventure with Sarah, and today's Adventure with Sarah is an adventure in liquor. I am joined today by my friend Colin Mairs, who is a Scotsman, but who lives in New Zealand. How's it going, Colin?
Hey, Sarah. Good, thank you.
Did I say, good day to you? It's the middle of the day for you, right?
It's 4 p.m. here in New Zealand, so that's a good time to start tasting some Scotch.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's get started. I've got my little setup here, so I have some and you have some as well. So let's go ahead and talk about Scotch whiskey. Okay, go for it.
Cool. So welcome everybody. And if you've got, just for those watching, if you've got your own whiskies as well, we'll talk about terminology in a minute, but whiskies or scotches, then feel free to taste along with us. And the order that we're going to taste in is going from really sort of the lightest. We've not got, Sarah and I, the exact same bottles. We've got two the same, but we'll go from the lightest, so lightest in terms of bouquet, palate, whatever, or lightest in alcohol, so lowest level of alcohol, and then going up to the strongest level of alcohol, but always finishing with the peatiest one, the smokiest one. Cool. So we've got five. Yeah. We've got 5 whiskies to taste today. So we're professionals, but yeah, whatever you've got, join along, and we'll try to sort of measure it so that we go lightly as we go, and see if we can get through 5 in 1 hour. So we're not going to be doing shots of whiskey. That's not the way to do it. But we'll just appreciate each one and talk a little bit about different things along the way.
That sounds good. All right.
Cool.
Okay, so let's jump in, huh?
Okay.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit of introduction then to my interest in whiskey and how I got into it. So as Sarah said, I'm a Scotsman. I live in New Zealand though, and I came here firstly 7 years ago, properly moved 5 years ago. And so it was really when I moved to New Zealand that I properly started to get interested in whiskey. So I probably started to like Scotch whiskey, single malts, about 10 years ago. And I would always have 1 or 2 bottles at home, but didn't really explore much further than that. And then when I moved here, I was looking for a part-time job, and I went along to a whiskey shop in Auckland. It's called Sam Sneed's House of Whiskey. Sam's now moved out of Auckland up to Mangawhai, but Sam and Nigel Kelly, they were the partners at the House of Whiskey when I moved here. And so I went along to see them, and I said, "Can you give me a job?" They said, "No, we don't need anyone just now, but come back and have a drink with us sometime." And so I said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." So I just sort of started going back there and getting to know a bit more about whiskey through them, and then through whiskey circles in New Zealand. So really in New Zealand, sometimes people joke that New Zealand's like a first world village. So it's kind of everyone knows everyone, and anyone that's into something a little bit different or has a special interest, you'll soon meet other people who are also into that. So I've kind of got into whiskey circles now, and really just through meeting other people that are whiskey geeks, as we call ourselves, I've learned a lot more about Scotch whiskey. So Sarah and I thought it'd be fun to do a little bit of a journey into whiskey. I should say I'm not an expert, so I don't know everything, but I'll tell you what I know. I certainly do have a passion for whiskey, so hopefully I can share that with you.
And I can say that my experience with Scotch whiskey is basically that my in-laws have always been very big Scotch whiskey fans, and these are all of my father-in-laws. So thank you to my father-in-law for loaning them to me. And we've always had it at like on Christmas or Easter, like on a special occasion. But I had a really fun experience once, which was I was working on the Scotland book, updating it, and I wandered into a place in Edinburgh, a little Scotch shop. Do you know Cadenhead's in Edinburgh?
Yes,
yeah.
Very well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wandered into this shop and I'm just asking these guys about this. Oh, what are your hours? What are your prices? And I'm trying to kind of, get things wrapped up. And as I'm about to walk out, the guy said to me, "Hey, if you want, we're having a Scotch whiskey club tonight, and you are welcome to be our special guest if you want." And I said, "Sure." So I went to this pub and I ended up spending 4 hours with all of these guys in Edinburgh who had been drinking Scotch for like 100 years practically. I mean, they were all a little older than me and way more knowledgeable, but it was fascinating to learn. And they taught me how to taste things. And at the end of the night, they had door prizes, which was very funny. They took all of these airplane-sized bottles of liquor and they emptied them out and they poured whiskey in, but they took the labels off. So your door prize, you didn't know what you were getting. And so that was kind of like the prize at the end of the night. You got a mystery scotch that you would have to take home, and then you'd have to come back and report on later. So that's my education right there.
Yeah, yeah. So it's fun. It's fun. I think whiskey. Some other spirits are similar, but I think whiskey is the main spirit that people really come together as a community. So you don't really get many, I think, vodka communities. Gin has become fashionable now, and rum as well. But I think whiskey is the main one that people come together over a good whiskey. Shall we pour our first whiskey while we talk?
I think that sounds great.
That's good. So Sarah's going to pour the Jura 10, and I'm going to pour Chivas Regal 18-year-old.
Can you tell me something about the glasses? Because I borrowed these glasses and I'm not sure what, I know this one with a little hat. I know that you're supposed to take this one, you warm the whiskey in your hand and then you take this off and you get the like whoosh of fumes. But is there any, the shapes and sizes, does that matter?
Not really. So I think if you got, I can see 4 glasses there. Have you got 4 or 5?
I have 5.
5. Okay, so I can see that 3 of them are kind of Glencairn shaped, and one of them is more of a brandy or cognac glass. Okay. So what I've got, and I'll use for all mine, is the Glencairn. So really with tasting and properly for nosing Scotch whisky, you want to use something that's more of a tulip shape. So this is a glass that's specifically designed for drinking Scotch whisky, and that's patented that shape. And so probably in the bottom of them all, this one does say the Glencairn glass, but then they're often branded with different things from distilleries, or this one's from a whisky festival. So that shape just helps to bring the whisky more towards your nose. If you don't have a Glencairn glass, then the next alternative would be, as you've got one there, a brandy glass. So I've got one here just for demonstration. So that is also a good glass to be able to, again, appreciate the smells. So it's got that kind of tulip shape and it funnels the smells up towards your nose. Brandy is often sort of cradled like that, like you said, with the one with the hat on it. So you can cradle it and warm it up, and you can do that as well with the Glencairn. So sometimes if mine's at a good temperature just now, but if the glass especially is a bit cold, you might want to warm it up just so you can smell a bit better. You release more aromas and release more tastes. Okay. If you don't have either Glencairn or a brandy glass, the next option would be a small wine glass. So these are just tasting wine glasses. And again, it serves essentially the same purpose. So it's that tulip shape and it's going to funnel the smells up. Yeah. This is the most common whiskey glass, really, the Glencairn, but there are a few other varieties. This one is by a company called Spiegelau. They make great glasses. It looks a bit more like a wine glass, but has a little bit more of a kind of outward lip at the top. And then I'll just show you one more. This one is called the Neat whiskey glass. And it's a little bit different. It can be a little bit awkward to get used to actually for drinking. But again, it's got that shape that will funnel the smells up. And the thing with this one is supposed to be that when you sip it, you tilt your head back and you can actually still maintain eye contact with whoever you're talking to. Whereas these ones, you're always putting your head right back and looking up to the sky. Yeah, this one I've always enjoyed with a little hat, because you just sit here and you put your scotch in and then you just hold it like this to warm it up. And then when you kind of lift the little lid up, it's like whoosh, like this huge like shot of the whiskey scent. So it's kind of a fun one. This one's from Glenmorangie, I guess. Right. So, okay, so I'll start with this one here. And then we're going to do the Jura first, right? Jura, so you get Jura, yeah. So as I mentioned before, Sarah and I have got some that are the same, or 2 that are almost the same, and some that are different. But we'll talk about the differences then, what we do these ones. So Sarah's got a single malt, and that's the Jura single malt. So Jura is an island. I don't know how well you can see this map here, but Jura is here. Maybe just hidden by some bottles. So this is the west coast of Scotland. And Jura is near to the island called Islay. So we'll talk a bit more about Islay in a moment. But Jura has just one distillery, so that's the Jura distillery, and that is the Jura single malt. So I'll talk a little bit about terminology. Firstly, usually when I'm talking about this drink, I refer to it as whiskey, whereas in the US, most people refer to it as Scotch. So Scotch just means it's from Scotland, and there's whiskey from all around the world. So the main countries producing whiskey today are Ireland, the US, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, both producing good whiskies now. Taiwan, India produce quite a lot. And so any of those countries, whatever they produce, you can call it whiskey. But only product that comes from Scotland can be called Scotch. And so usually in Scotland, we just use the broad term whiskey. So I'll use those terms interchangeably. But sometimes I'll call it, just to distinguish, I'll call it Scotch whiskey as well. Or sometimes I get into the habit of, when I'm talking to people from the US, I just end up saying Scotch as well. But when I say whiskey, I mean kind of the broad range of whiskey. So in Scotland, we've got two main types of whiskey, and that is blended Scotch whiskey. So that's what I have here. This is the Chivas Regal 18-year-old blend. And then the other main type of whiskey in Scotland is single malt whiskey, and that's what you've got, Sarah.
Yep.
So the difference, really, just to get the basic differences between them, a blend, it means it's a mixture, and so that's a mixture of different grain whiskies and single malts. Grain whiskey, that just means a whiskey that is produced in a coffee still, so not coffee like the coffee you drink in the morning, but coffee, Coffey, and that's from the Irishman who patented this still called the coffee still, so Aeneas coffee, and it's a continuous still that produces large quantities of spirit, but generally a spirit with a lower quality. So in order to kind of bring that quality up, you mix that in with good quality whiskies, and that's the single malts. So a blend could be a mixture of up to 30 or 40 different grain whiskies and single malts. So this is 18 years old, and that means that everything in there is at least 18 years old. The one you have there is the Jura 10, and that means that everything in there is at least 10 years old. So it means it's aged for at least 10 years in an oak cask in Scotland. Some of it might be more than 10 years old with that one. And that's just because they want to try to have a consistency. So sometimes we'll have to put in things that are maybe 12 years, 13, 14, and other stuff that is just 10. And that's just to get a consistency of the flavour. So each release of the Jura 10-year-old should taste like the last one.
So one other question I have for you is that you're doing a blend and I'm doing a single malt. Now, one of the things I remember learning is about, do you add water? Do you not add water? What is the situation with adding water to your whiskey?
Yeah, a good question and a common question. And I usually just say that the best way to drink whiskey is the way that you like best. So if you haven't found that way yet, experiment. And generally in Scotland, we will add a little bit of water. It can depend sometimes on the strength of the whiskey as well. So this is 40% ABV. I think yours is that, can you see on the label? I think it was at 40 or 40.
Let's see. It is 40% alcohol, yeah.
40 as well, yeah. So 40 is the legal minimum for a Scotch whiskey. So I would say that with a 40% whiskey, it's already 60% water, so you don't really want to add more water.
Wow.
But you could if you wanted to, and you could just see how it goes. When we get onto some of the other ones later on, they're a bit higher ABV. So with those ones, generally you would add water. But always just for tasting purposes, you would always want to taste it just neat first, so with nothing added, okay. And then drop by drop, just to see if that changes, if that opens it up, and if it makes it any better. Okay.
So is it the same kind of process to taste Scotch that you would for wine? So you like aerate it and you look at the color,
yeah,
and stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Pretty much the same. So it's a sensory experience, and so you're using as many senses as you can. Sound maybe doesn't come into it so much. I can't hear the whiskey saying anything or singing. Part of the sound.
With glass, I think then we'll be able to hear it singing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The color, that's an interesting one, because generally when you're tasting a whiskey, people will hold it up to the light or against something white and see how it looks against a white background. And you can say something interesting about the color if you want to, but the color doesn't really mean anything. That's because it is allowed in Scotland for whiskey producers to add colouring. Whiskey purists think it's a terrible thing. It's basically a caramel colouring called, chemical name E150A, and it's just very, very little drops of colour that will add to the colour. So this one, I can almost definitely say has had colour added.
It's marketing.
The laws in Scotland. Yeah. So basically, in the mind of the consumer, a darker whiskey, they think that means older, and that means better, and that means higher quality. So really, it's partly a dupe for people that don't know a whole lot about whiskey to think, oh, dark whiskey. They see a dark whiskey at duty free and say, I'm going to buy the darker one. So it doesn't really mean anything. So basically, when you're tasting, then you can look at the color, you can say something interesting if you want, but it doesn't matter. It's all about more about the smell and the taste. So when you smell, just like wine, you put the nose in first, because whiskey is much higher alcohol content than wine. You maybe just go in a bit gently at first, and generally I don't know if this is the same with wine, but when nosing whiskey, you'll often open your mouth as well, and that just makes it, don't know what the difference is, but I think it makes it circulate better. But it's a better way to nose it.
Actually, yeah, no, I've never been told that, but that makes total sense. That would make sense. Yeah. Wine tasting too, huh?
Yeah. So just with the mouth slightly open. So sometimes if I'm having a whiskey at home, Claudia and I are just sitting in front of the TV or whatever, I'll sometimes nose the whiskey for a long time before I actually taste it, and I just enjoy the nosing process. But we've only got an hour, so we better not nose for too long. But generally, you can nose it, see what you can pick up there. If you can pick up any kind of fruity flavors, pretty common.
We have a question. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, there's a question that just popped up. Somebody's wondering if we know the difference between Scotch whiskey or whiskey and bourbon. Do you know what the difference is?
Yeah, in a broad sense, I do. Yeah. So Scotch whiskey, again, just from Scotland. So Scotch whiskey can only be from Scotland. If it's from anywhere else, it can't be called Scotch whiskey. And Scotch whiskey, well, in the case of blends, it can be made from different grains, but in the case of single malt, it's only made from malted barley. So the difference between single malt and bourbon is with the grains that are used. And so bourbon has to be at least 51% maize or corn in the mash bill. So the mash bill is basically the recipe for making the bourbon. So it can be 51, or has to be at least 51% corn, and then the rest can be rye or can be other grains or even malt. So that's the difference ingredient wise.
So it's really a very different thing in the end then.
It's still a category of whiskey. So it's a brown spirit made from grain, yeast, and water. But it's quite different flavors than bourbon. Okay.
And one other question that we've got that floated across here: is it important to ask if there's coloring when you go to a distillery?
Yeah, I would say it'd be fun to ask. Some distilleries. So really, if a whiskey maker doesn't add colouring, they'll be very proud to admit that they don't. They'll be very proud to say we don't add colouring. If they do add colouring, they'll avoid the question, or they'll say, oh, we have to do that just to make it look nice on the shelves. Some whiskey producers as well will use a coloured bottle. Luckily, I had some more to hand here just in case I had to find other examples. But for example, Ardbeg and Lafroig as well, and several others, they'll use a green bottle, and that's so that you can't see the colour. And so that's just so that people looking to buy the whiskey, they can't say, oh, this one's darker than that one. So as it's a natural product and as it ages in wood, it can change its colour. And sometimes a 10-year-old Ardbeg, for example, will come out looking a different colour than another. So that's if they're not using colouring. So yeah, I would say it's important to ask. One other trick is that if you buy a bottle in Germany, or you ask a friend in Germany, officially on labelling in Germany, they have to say everything that's included in that bottle. So they have to declare if it contains colouring. So that's a German friend, if it says E150A, that's the caramel colouring. Yeah.
Oh, sneaky. Okay.
Yeah. So usually in Scotland we say slange before we drink. So slange is Gaelic for head. Slange. Right.
There is a lot going on there. This one is surprisingly peaty, and normally the ones that are sort of the lighter ones, especially the Highland ones, don't taste quite so peaty, but this is very smoky, this one.
Yeah. So people talk about whiskey in different regions as well. So as you mentioned, the Highland. So that one you've got Jura. That can be. Well, people are a bit fluid with the categories as well, but it can be classed as Highland or it can be classed as Island. So because it's on an island, and generally there's, well, depending again how you categorize them, but different regions. So there's lowland, highland, Speyside, which is a subcategory really of highland. So that's one region within the Highlands where there's about half of all the whisky distilleries in Scotland. And then there's Islay, so that's generally, but not always, the very smoky ones. We'll come on to that a bit later. And then there's also Campbelltown. And so I was delighted to see that you've got a couple of Campbelltowns there as well. So that's an often overlooked region, I would say, of Scotch whisky. A lot of people just go automatically to the Islas or the Speysides, or Highlands as well. But Campbelltown is, a small region that used to have a lot of distilleries, now just has 3 or 4 functioning distilleries. So let me talk a little bit more just about the differences then, blend and single malt. So, like I say, this one is a blend, and a lot of time with whiskey snobs, they'll look down upon blends. So they think that blends are inferior whiskies, but really blends do have their place in the whiskey world. And generally, I would say blends they come into their own when they're mixed. So again, talking about how to drink the whiskey, if you add water, there's a big debate over whether you should add ice or not. And some people will think it's sacrilege to mix a whiskey with Coca-Cola or with another soft drink, but really that's what blends are for. Blends are for mixing. So maybe this, not so much tasting like we are just now, but in a tall glass and maybe with soda water and ice, it's a refreshing, easy cocktail, really. Yeah. So the one that you've got there, Sarah, the Jura, I always get a taste of marzipan off of that. Do you get any kind of marzipan or almonds?
I can see almond. Yeah, for sure. I personally find, just in the things that I've tasted, just observing my own likes, I tend to like Highland whiskey more, and I don't know why. I think it has a little bit more mild flavor. The ones that are really smoky, the ones that taste like you're licking a peat bog, not so much my favorite, but we'll try one of those and we'll see what kind of a knot my mouth gets twisted into. But yeah, this one's pretty good. It is smokier than I would have expected from this, coming from this area. So, but it's good. Yeah, it's not bad.
So I think that one is maybe lightly peated, if I remember rightly. So maybe a little bit of peat, but shall we move on to number 2?
Yep, and that's the Kilkerran, which we both have. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, Kilkerran. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to a different glass.
I was glad to see that you had this one and the next one that you're going to have, the Springbank. So these are actually produced by the same distillery makers, or the same company, I should say. So it's Mitchell's, and this one, Kilkerran, it comes from the distillery called Glengyle. So if you can see in the front of the bottle, thank you. You've got Glengyle Distillery, but it's called Kilkerran Whisky, and that's because, if I remember rightly, I think it was actually a company in Germany that were selling a blend and calling it Glengyle, and they wouldn't release the naming rights. So that is officially the name of the distillery, Glengyle, and they just didn't want to get into a legal battle with them, and so instead they called the single malt Kilkerran. So they can still say the name of the distillery, but it's generally known as Kilkerran. So this one is aged 12 years. We can maybe talk a little bit about age and numbers. And so the age is the length of time that the whiskey is spent in an oak cask before it goes into the bottle. So whiskey doesn't age in a bottle, so it's not like wine. You can't buy a bottle of whiskey, not open it, and keep it for 10 years, and it becomes a 22-year-old. It's always going to be a 12-year-old once it's in the bottle. The legal requirement in Scotland is that it has to age for a minimum of 3 years in an oak cask in Scotland. So if it's any less than 3 years, it's not whiskey. When it comes off the still, it's a clear spirit. So it's basically like a vodka or a gin, looks clear. And then it takes on the colour from the cask. So I know for a fact that this company do not use colouring. So these are real purists in Campbelltown. And so it's quite a lighter shade. So again,
yeah, it's more like a light honey color, sort of, or it looks like apple cider vinegar, very light.
Yeah. So maybe some people, if they were looking at that on a shelf, they would maybe go for that instead, because they would think, oh, deep honey color. That must mean it's better.
I actually feel the opposite. When I see a really dark Scotch like that, I tend to move away from those ones. I tend to really, I think it's just because I've tasted enough Scotch that I know what I like. And maybe there's nothing, obviously now I feel like I've been debunked on this whole theory that the lighter ones fit more with things I like, but I usually go away from the darker ones. I don't know why. It just sort of fits in with anyone that I've liked has been a lighter color.
Yeah.
Now I realize that was a really stupid metric because it doesn't mean anything. So that was great. I learned.
Color, so color doesn't matter, and this sounds like a very nice nice sort of philosophy for life. But color doesn't matter, and age doesn't matter either. So age is just a number, and really so one time I was on tour actually with a Polish guy. I hope he's not watching, in Scotland, and we went into quite a really good whiskey bar in Speyside region called the Quake Bar, and he asked, "What's your oldest whiskey?" And so he just wanted to try the oldest whiskey. He didn't want to try the best whiskey. He just said, "What's your oldest whiskey?" And they had, I think it was a 45-year-old Mortlach, and it looked really, really dark because it'd taken on all the color from the cask. And I nosed it, and it just smelled too woody. So there is a point where it gets past its best. And it can spend too long in the cask. Macallan, actually, they just recently released, I think, some whiskies that are 75 years old. I don't know what that tastes like. I'd love to try it, but I think
just for like comparison's sake, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think you need a nice port to get through it, but the age doesn't really mean much. And older whiskies will be more expensive as well, but that's just because they're a commodity. So because it's spent longer in the barrel, and because of the evaporation, so the barrel basically breathes while it's in there. And I've got a piece of wood as a prop here. This is a stave off a whiskey barrel. So the stave is charred in the inside, and then when the whiskey's in there, it's got contact with the wood, and it's breathing, so it's letting out a little bit of evaporation through the wood. We call that in Scotland the angel's share, so that goes off to the angels. And then it's also taking in the air from its surroundings. So when it's in the warehouse, it's taking in all those musty smells. And if you ever step into a Scotch whisky warehouse, they smell, well, but we say fusty. Do you know that word?
Fusty.
So fusty means a bit kind of dusty and dirty, like an old garage or somewhere, an old workshop. So it's got that real fusty smell, which is great. And so that is getting soaked in through the wood as well. So the longer it spends in there, the more it's evaporating, and then the less and less whiskey is going to be in the cask at the end of it. And that's why they have to sell it for more, so there's less of it. And then as they get bottled and as people drink them, or sometimes people sell them on, and then some people open them, there's less and less of them. So as it gets rarer, it gets more expensive. So again, price doesn't really make it better. It's just because there's less of it, often that there'll be more of it.
Cool. Well, this I like that one? It's very different than the previous one. Super different. Like you couldn't one to the other. It's like they're completely different liqueurs. This almost smells like brown sugar to me, like molasses.
Mm. Yeah.
Ooh, I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, very different. Everything about it is different. That's so interesting. And that's one of the things I think is so fascinating if you get the chance to have a bunch of them, because it really, even more so than wine, I think that Scotch whiskey has such a broad range of different flavors. I mean, obviously wines do, but there's something about these, just even the smell, even if you don't taste any of them, you just smell each of them individually. They're so different. Yeah.
And I would always say as well, maybe I'm biased, but I would say there's a whiskey out there for everyone. So if you haven't found yet the whiskey you like, just keep trying, you'll find it eventually. But generally, what's that?
It's like dating.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I don't know if there's a whiskey Tinder. Someone should invent that. But,
business idea, Colin. We got a business idea.
Ding. But I think if you're just getting into Scotch whiskies, you want to start off with the lighter ones, and you work towards the ones that we're going to try at the end, the more peaty ones. I once heard a story about the distillery manager of Lafroig. So Lafroig is an isla, and it's a typically very, very peaty distillery. And he used to say that whenever someone came to the distillery and they got to the tasting part of the tour, if he would ask them if you'd all tried whiskey before, and if anyone had never tried whiskey before, he wouldn't give them a Lafroig. He would run away and get them a Glenfarclas 21-year-old. This one is a 25, but he would get them one of these because this is a very sweet and sherried whiskey. And so he didn't want their first experience with whiskey to be a bad experience, or to put them off with that real smoky, pungent flavour. So you would get them something delicate and light. So start with the delicate light ones, Glenfarclas, Dalwhinnie, something like that, and then you can work up towards it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of
like
hopeless. I love Dalwhinnie. I think that's probably my favorite, but I think that Lefroy is a little bit like being punched in the face by a dirty gym sock that's been in a house fire. It's like there's nothing about it that I like. It just really, it's really like licking an ashtray. But I know some people think that, so I don't know.
I totally agree with you in those descriptions, and for me that sounds delicious. So when you go to the distillery at Lefroy as well, they've got all these little quotes outside that people have said about what it tastes like, and there's things like that, or it's like being smacked in the face with a rotten old fish, and some people love that, and I love it. So it's an acquired taste, I would say.
Okay, well, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Sicily where they eat a lot of things that everybody here would find objectionable. So I have absolutely nobody to judge. I've eaten all kinds of things. So, you know, what you like is what you like. I'm just not a fan of Lefroy. Maybe I am now, though. I should give it another try, I guess.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I tried it, and it was one of the first ones I ever tried. And it was just like, oh, yeah, I'm not sure Scotch is for me.
Yeah. And then, so with the casks as well, in Scotland, the two main types of casks that are used, and I say main types because now it's changing. Now there's a lot of experimentation and trying all kinds of different things. But the two main casks that are used would be an ex-bourbon cask. So bourbon and Scotch have a close relationship in that way, and then also ex-sherry casks. So sherry from Spain, so where they produce sherry wine, so fortified wine, the Jerez region of Spain. And so basically with Scotch whisky, it's never or almost never aged in a new cask. So it's never just used for the first time, that cask. It's always contained something else previously. So they'll buy bourbon casks from the distilleries in the US. And in the US, there's a law that says that the cask can only be used once. So I think apparently that's a way to protect the cooper's profession. So the barrel makers, they got together and said, we're going to make sure they can only use them once. But it's also a way for the taxman to know how many casks are going into the distillery, and therefore how many should be coming out. So that's a way of just keeping an eye on what they're doing there as well. So in Scotland, we ship over used bourbon casks from the USA. They'll dismantle them and then rebuild them. And so this was a stave that I picked up when I was at a cooperage. So there's a Speyside cooperage, and this was just an offcut. And I asked them, can I have that? So I brought it back with me, and the customs people in New Zealand were very kind and let me bring it in. They said, yeah, I don't think there's anything living in there. So a little ridge there would be where can you see that, where the lid would go on?
Yeah.
So it's a real art, the cooper's profession, to be able to put these together with no nails, no glue, nothing. It's just all wedged in there.
They're beautiful. And it would seem like that kind of craftsmanship would have no place in the modern world, but you know, places like this, yeah. That seems like a very Italian approach, though. Like, oh yeah, you can only use that barrel once. That's very affordable, you know, very sneaky.
Yeah.
Not bad. All right, so this is the Kilkerran, and that's our. So we're moving up in terms of like sort of strength of flavor and all of that, right?
Yeah. Well, so it can be debatable how to arrange a tasting. Generally, you want to start with the lighter things and move towards the heavier things. If there's things that are quite similar, then you would go to the alcohol volume. So that's why I decided to start, or for you to start in the Jura, which is 40%. We've moved up to 46% ABV with the Kilkerran. That was another thing I meant to look this up to get the proper conversions for it. But I think in the US you use a lot more the proof system. So I think it's roughly double. So basically 40% ABV. So that's generally what are on these bottles, alcohol by volume. 40% ABV is about 80 proof.
Yeah, it's about double.
So
as far as
about that. Yeah.
And you're right. I'm looking at the labels now. So the Jura is 40% alcohol. The Kilkerran is 46. The next one we're going to try is 46. Then we move on to one that is 50, and then the final one is 55%. So we'll be ready to go to bed by the end of that one.
Yeah, I will. Okay, so shall we move on to the next one? Yeah. So the closest I could find really to what you had there, Springbank, is one that's made by the same distillers, actually made in the same place, but just a different process. And so this one is called Hazel Burn. Can you see that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I picked this up at so you mentioned earlier Cadenheads in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And this is actually the same company that owns Cadenhead.
Oh,
So-
cool. Yeah. I was going to say the label looks the same because they handwrite their labels. The other thing they told me though is they said that you cannot drink, or you shouldn't drink their whiskeys straight because they don't put any water in them at all. And so when you
Yeah.
bring it in, like you really have to mix them, because I don't know if they're like 100% alcohol or what, but the guy was like, don't drink this straight. You have to mix it with water.
Yeah. So that will be more so the last two that we'll get onto for your last two, and my last two as well, which are, I think, I'm pretty sure they're cask strength. So cask strength means basically the strength that comes out the cask. So when it's put in the cask, it goes in at somewhere about 80 or 90% ABV, and over time, when it's in the cask, it mellows out. So it comes out the cask at sometimes around about 50, sometimes up to 60, and so when you get the ones from like Cadenhead shop or like this one as well, this is 58%. So that's cask strength. And so again, the purists, that's what we look for. So we want things that are cask strength.
Yep.
And also non-chill filtered. I don't know if it says it there. It doesn't say it, but non-chill filtered means that it's not gone through any process of filtering out the little warty bits. So basically, when it's in the cask, it sometimes takes on little bits of wood, little chips of whatever's in the cask. And so, again, in the mind of the uneducated consumer, they'll see little pieces of things floating in a bottle, and they'll say, "No, I don't want to buy that." Whereas if a whiskey geek sees a little thing floating in a bottle, they'll say, "I want to buy that because I want to chew on it or something." So we want it to be non-chill filtered. So chill filtered means it goes through a filtration process. They'll freeze it and unfreeze it, and it takes out any impurities. But with the non-chill filtered and cask strength, that's where you get the real good stuff, I would say.
The other fun thing that we did at that Cadenhead's whiskey shop is when I went back the day after, when I had a little bit of a hangover, I went back the next day to talk to those guys, and they let me blend my own bottle of whiskey because they had casks right there. And so I had tasted everything the night before, and I'm like, well, I'd like something kind of halfway between this one and this one. They're like, well, we can just blend it for you right here, which was really cool because I got to walk away with my own like custom blended whiskey, which is fun.
Yeah. So in the Cadenhead shop in Edinburgh, so that's down the bottom end of the Royal Mile.
Yeah.
Canongate, and they usually have, I think, 3 or sometimes 4, maybe more, casks there that you bottle your own. So they have the cask there behind the counter, and they also bottle up things like this. So they get things like this from the distillery, and they also they're an independent bottler, so they buy casks from different distilleries around Scotland and then bottle it themselves. So they're a great whiskey company. If you find anything by Cadenheads or by any of these 3 names, Kilkerran, Hazel Burn, and Springbank that you've got there, you always know it's going to be good quality. So at Springbank, that's the distillery, and they produce 3 different types of single malts. So they're producing Springbank, that's double distilled. They're producing this one, Hazel Burn, and this is triple distilled. I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. And then they produce another one which is called Longrow. So Longrow is peated and double distilled. We'll get onto peat a bit later as well. But somebody asked already about differences between Scotch whisky and bourbon. Another question I often get is what's the difference between Scotch and Irish? So in a simple way, people often talk about the spelling difference. And so Irish is spelled EY at the end, whereas Scotch is just Y, so just ending in Y. We joke that that's because the Irish have to add E to their whiskey to make it better. I don't know if you use the slang term E as well for like drugs, ecstasy.
Watch out, man. I'm Irish, so like,
yeah,
that's my friend. Although I'm Scotch Irish, I'm the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and then in the terms of the process, Irish generally will triple distill. So that means it's going through the big kettle-like thing, so it's boiling. So in the process of making the whiskey, you're making a beer first, and then you're basically boiling it up to distill off the alcohol vapor as alcohol rises or evaporates at a lower temperature than water. So the alcohol vapors will rise, the water will stay in the still, and then that will be condensed out the top and comes out as the clear spirit. And so generally, but not always, generally in Ireland they're doing that 3 times, so triple distilled, whereas in Scotland generally, but not always, they're doing it twice. So this is one of the exceptions where in Scotland they're doing it 3 times. So why triple, why double? Another joke that I often say is that the Irish triple distill just to be sure. So because the Irish like to say to be sure. So to be sure. And we also joke that the Irish didn't get it right the second time, so they need to do it 3 times. Whereas the Irish, they'll joke that the Scots are too tight to do it 3 times, they'll just do it twice. But really, it's just the different ways that the different distilleries have found that works best for them. Some will experiment as well and just try different things. There are some distilleries, I think it's Longrow actually as well, that will do, I think they call it like a 2.5 distillation. I don't know exactly how that works, but yeah, it's just the different ways that each distillery is found to do it best.
The 2.5 distillation is for somebody like me whose people originated in Scotland and then moved to Ireland. So
yeah,
Northern Irish people, that's our distillation is 2.5, right?
There you go. And then aged in bourbon casks.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers, Slanch.
Right next Slancha. Slancha, that's the Irish way, Slancha.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, that's got more alcohol. Yeah, that's warming going down. Mm.
So I would say that one that you've got there is a classic, really good whiskey. So when people ask me what whiskey should I buy, what should I look for, I'll always tell them either Springbank 10, that one you've got, or also Springbank 12. They're always 2 consistently good whiskies.
Excellent. A couple of questions that are popping up here. What would you pair with Scotch? I actually have here crackers. I have just wheat thins, but then I also grabbed my box of chocolates because I think chocolate goes really well with whiskey. What do you like to pair with this, Colin?
So yeah, both same again. I would say it depends again if you're tasting just for tasting's sake and for trying to appreciate the whiskey, or if you're just want to enjoy it. So if you want to enjoy it, something stronger tasting like chocolate as well, or if you're just kind of cleansing your palate in between, you would use just dry crackers like I've got here. You can also pair it with cheese. One very good combination is a smoky whiskey and a blue cheese. So whiskey and a blue cheese, I think, goes really well. And again, they're probably extreme tastes, both of them, but they mix well. Depending on the country and the context as well, you can pair with something like ice cream as well. So you can just have a little nibble of ice cream, a little sip of whiskey, goes quite well.
I would say, actually, I had never tried that, but one of my favorite combinations in the world is spicy gorgonzola with a really strong red wine. I bet spicy gorgonzola and Scotch would be fantastic together. I should try that. Another question that I have is, what makes the flavors different? Like, what can a Scotch producer do to make the flavors unique and different?
Yeah. How long have we got for that question? so that's a big one, and that's hotly debated. There's been pages and pages of books written about that. I would say, and probably most people would agree, that the main thing that changes the flavour would be the cask. So it's what the cask is contained beforehand. So again, talking about 2 different sides of the spectrum of whiskey. You've got the peaty ones, really smoky ones, and then often we'll talk about the sherry whiskies, or we call them sherry bombs. So I think that Springbank you've got is part bourbon and part sherry, but for example, this one maybe, Glendronach. So that's a typical example of a real sherry whiskey. So it's just aged in sherry casks, and it takes on a lot of those flavors. Other things that can influence the flavor can be the shape of the still. Generally, they say that a shorter still, so shorter and dumpier, will create a heavier kind of spirit, whereas a taller, lighter, or taller still will create a lighter spirit, so it'll be kind of lighter and fruitier. Some people will say that the water has a difference as well. You get hard waters and soft waters, and they'll say that can come through in the final spirit. I think it's hotly debated. People talk about coastal distilleries as well, so a distillery that's by the sea, and they say that, you can really taste that it's coastal, but a lot of the coastal distilleries, they don't have the space actually to mature on site, and so they're sending their whiskey away in casks to be matured elsewhere, so they're not really taking on that coastal spirit while they age. So unless the coastalness is getting in so much just in that distillation process, I don't think that location can really have so much of an impact on it. Whether peat is used or not as well, that has obviously a strong influence in the flavour. That's one other main difference between Scotch and Irish, is that Irish almost never use peat in the malting process. Scotch don't always. It's a misconception that we always use peat. We don't always use it, but we do often, and so that's a typical distinction between Irish and Scotch, is the use of peat. So shall I talk a little about peat? I'll talk about peat when we get on to.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm actually going to pull the gorgonzola out of the fridge since I'm sitting here.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So blue cheese or gorgonzola? What do you think?
I would say blue cheese for the last one, certainly. Maybe gorgonzola for now and the next one.
You guys get to see the interior of my very packed fridge. All right.
Is that in the right spot?
Yeah, I know. I did. I think that's great, actually. And right in the traffic pattern for where my cat likes to wander around. All right.
Something you could try, actually, Sarah, just for experimentation as well, is to put an ice cube in this.
Yes, and actually that was a question that just came across the feed from Facebook, is that somebody's asking what does that ice, no ice, what's the story there?
Yeah. So again, I would say drink it how you like it. Drink it however makes you happy. So some people enjoy to drink Scotch whisky with ice. I would say if you're tasting Scotch whisky, you don't want to put ice in from the start. But just so that we can kind of compare what effect that has, we can put an ice cube in. The reason I would say you don't really want to put an ice cube in when you're tasting it is because ice numbs things, and so then you're not going to really taste it properly, so it's just going to numb the whiskey. So just so we can experiment and try how it tastes.
And it would that would change your experience of it, because part of when you're tasting Scotch is the idea is to take the glass and hold it and warm it so you get the vapors coming up. So if you put ice in it, you're it's counterproductive to that process, right?
Yeah. So I think it's the fault of the movies, where people in the movies always order a Scotch on the rocks. Yeah. And so they take a big tumbler glass like this one. That was something else we could maybe do if we have time, is compare how that is for nosing. So that's not going to be any good at all for nosing, because it's just open and flat bottomed. Yeah. So you're not going to get much out of that. But that's for just when you're drinking a Scotch on the rocks, and some people just enjoy that. So you fill it full of ice and pour the whiskey over. But now, if I nose this now, I still get a little bit on the nose.
I actually like it with the ice. I don't know why. I think I like the flavor is somehow different and improved for me with the ice. Yeah.
So it's less burny, basically. It doesn't burn as much. It's easier to drink, I guess, with the ice. But we talked a little bit about water before. The main way, really, when you're tasting then, would be just to add some drops of water. So I would say we could do that more so when we get on to the next ones. Okay. Shall we move on?
Another question here. The old fashioned, do you know a cocktail called the old fashioned? Yeah. So is it possible to make an old fashioned with Scotch whiskey, mixing bitters and orange with Scotch?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. An old fashioned is usually with bourbon, but you do get Scotch old fashions as well. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's possible. Yeah. You wouldn't want to do that with an expensive Scotch, because some of these can get really expensive, right? Yeah. Well, again, purists would say no, you don't want to do that. But again, I would always say if that's what makes you happy, then do it. I mean, that's the point of drinks, I would say, is to enjoy them. And so if you're not enjoying it, drinking it straight, try mixing it, try making cocktails, try soda water. There's a quite well-known whiskey writer called Dave Broom, and he tried, I can't remember how many it was, but 100 or more than 100 whiskies, with the 5 most common mixers used around the world. So that was, I think, just neat, with ice, with water, with coconut water. So in certain countries, I think it's in Asia, they use coconut water a lot. Also with green tea, so cold green tea with whiskey, and with Coke and with soda water. One of his revelations from that was that a smoky whiskey with Coke goes really well. So something like a Lafroig or a Lagavulin or Ardbeg mixed with Coke actually tastes pretty good. And somebody who's watching just suggested to us ginger ale and Scotch whiskey, which actually that would tickle me because I really love ginger ale. Somebody has just asked, is there the glasses that we're using, do they have a name? Do you happen to know? Yeah, Glencairn. Glencairn. Okay, that's the name of the glass. That's not the name of the Scotch. It's just the name of the glass. All right. No, so it's the name. So it's on the bottom of the machine stand. So that's the name of the company that makes them, and so they've patented this shape of glass. So it's the Glencairn glass. So there's ones that are similar, like this one, which comes from Bourbon Distillery. It's a little bit different. It just doesn't have the base to it. Yeah. So basically, it's still that tulip shape, but these are the most classically used glasses for Scotch whisky. So Glencairn. Glen means narrow valley, and cairn means stone or a pile of stones. But it's just a name that came up. Cool. Well, the Gorgonzola was really good. That's really good. This is a very mild Gorgonzola. It's just from Trader Joe's, but that's a nice combination. I like that. I can see that the blue would be better with a really strong one. Yeah. Shall we move on to number 4?
Yes.
And then
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on glasses wise.
you can always come back to that. So I thought it'd be good with this one, then we can try it doing water in the water, because that one you've got is, what did you say it is, 50% or 50
Yeah, this
something?
one is Islay and it's 50, yeah.
Right, and this one that I've got, this is 66.7.
Okay. And I'm saying that wrong. It's not Islay, it's Isla? Isla? Is that what
Isla.
Isla.
Yeah, so
I
imagine
knew that. I don't know why I said Islay, but yeah, Isla, yeah.
imagine the Y is not there.
Yeah.
And then pronounce it like Isle. So this one that I'll try now, this is actually from a New Zealand distillery. I thought I'd try something a little bit different.
Yes, and actually that was something I wanted to mention to everybody who's watching this. Eventually, Colin and I are going to do a New Zealand tour together. Now it seems like it's going to be kicked back to November next year. But if you didn't sign up, you have your chance, because next November we're going to actually go and visit a Scotch distillery in New Zealand, because they make it there too.
I have to correct you there. Is that a Scotch distillery, Sarah?
No, it's not. It is a New Zealand whiskey manufacturer.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the style of Scotch.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they are making whiskey in a Scotch style, and it's called Cardrona. They've followed more or less all the same kind of process as a Scotch whiskey distillery would. They even brought over stills from Scotland. So Forsyths are one of the main manufacturers of whiskey stills in Scotland, and they shipped them over and put them into position by helicopter down in Cardrona in the South Island. This was their first release as a single malt. So again, it can be called single malt because it is made from malted barley. It can't be called Scotch because it's not made in Scotland, but as you can see, it's the Cardrona single malt whiskey. So this one is 3 years. So it's basically just fits the criteria in Scottish terms to be called single malt. So again, in Scotland, you have to age for a minimum of 3 years in an oak cask. And this one is aged in bourbon barrels, ex-bourbon barrel. And it's even got barrel number 103.
Oh, wow.
So with good whiskies and good scotches, you'll find a lot more detail on the label. So if you really dig in deep, you can find specific numbers. It will sometimes say it's one of so many bottlings. Does this one say? It's bottle number 91. Doesn't say how many were produced. But this was, like I say, the first release. This one was bottled in 2018. So it's even got right down to the date. So casked
That's cool.
3rd December 2015 and bottled 4th of December 2018.
Okay. And then I have one that I'm going to attempt to butcher the name of. Cladic. Is that right?
So the
Not even close.
So you know that CH in Scotland is almost always a sound.
Yeah.
Like loch. But the exception here is that the last CH is silent.
Oh, geez, I got Bruchlade. Okay. Oh, yeah. My Scottish ancestors are rolling over in their Highland graves. All right, so it's an Isla, so that means it's going to be more peaty, right?
Well, no.
No?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No. So I think, if I'm right in saying, I think that is one that doesn't contain peat.
Okay.
Bruchlade, generally their general style, that's a special one because that's Isla barley. So that means that the barley used in that has been grown only on Isla. A lot of the times the distilleries on Isla will still use local barley, but they'll also mix it in with barley from elsewhere in Scotland or even occasionally from overseas. Mm-hmm. This is also from, is it? Yes, it is. This is from the same distillery, but this is a peated version. So they call it Porch Charlotte. So it's still from Bruchlade Distillery, but Porch Charlotte is a place name on the island. And so this one is heavily peated. So Bruchlade, their general style, like I think it's a 10-year-old. It comes in a kind of, it's actually not a see-through bottle as well, but quite a distinctive kind of turquoisey coloured bottle. That's not peated at all. But they have produced a whiskey called Octomore, and that is a cult whiskey because it is very heavily peated. So the Octomore releases are always highly sought after. So
just want to take a little heartbeat here and thank my in-laws who are the ones who gave me all of these to sample tonight. And my mother-in-law just commented that this company also makes Botanist Gin, which is one of my favorites. That's a really good gin. So, really. So, Sláinte, let's try this one.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, they make. very glad they make the Botanist Gin and the still they make it in is called Ugly Betty.
Oh, really?
Because it's not the prettiest of stills, but it produces a really good gin.
I really like the Botanist Gin, and I like to make a gin and tonic with rosemary in it. So I put some lime, and then I crush rosemary in the bottom of my glass, and then put in the Botanist Gin and let it sit there for a few minutes, and then I put in the ice and the tonic water, and it's really good.
Nice, yeah.
Ooh, that's really good, actually. This it has a very different flavor. It's almost like honey, or like, I don't know, I'm thinking cinnamon or something like that. This really would be a nice after dinner drink for like Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And can you feel that stronger alcohol on it as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not as big a jump between this and this, but the jump between this and this was significant. So yeah, it's yeah, this is really good. It has almost like a citrusy sort of flavor to me. What do you think? What do you taste?
Well, mine's pretty different, yeah. But this one it doesn't taste like 3 years. It tastes a lot more than 3 years. So they've obviously done a good aging process there. But again, when a lot of whiskey writers went to try their spirit in about 4 years ago or something, and originally they'd said they wouldn't release anything until it was 10 years old. But then so many people convinced them that their new make spirit, so when it's less than 3 years, it's called new make, or can be called Clydach or White Dog. They convinced them that their new make spirit was so good that they should bottle things as Progress Report. So this is a young whiskey, but I think really good for a 3-year-old whiskey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is a lovely one. So, we have another question. Do you decant your Scotch, or do you leave it in its original bottle?
I would always leave it in its original bottle.
I would agree.
There wouldn't really be many reasons to decant, aside from if you just want to display it in a nice decanter glass, or whatever you call them things. Is that called a decanter? So yeah, if you want to display it on that, I've heard some people joke about that they'll put the cheap whiskey in the fancy looking decanter, and that's what they give to friends when they come over, and then they keep the good stuff in the bottle. But I don't do that.
But for $2 chuck at dinner parties is you put your $2 chuck cheap red wine into a decanter and leave that on the counter, and then you can break that out and people think it's fancy. Not that I've ever done that. People that have come to
yeah. The only other situation I would think of that you might decant is if the cork was to break off, and so then you want to decant out the little pieces of cork. So sometimes that happens with older bottles or bottles that have maybe been stored wrongly. Another thing about storage is, unlike wine, you always want to store whiskey standing up. So you don't really want to put it on its side because that can damage the cork over time.
That's a good tip. Ooh, that right there, blue cheese and this. Oh yeah, chef's kiss to that one.
Yeah. Then, so in these ones, because this one is again 66.7, and yours is, what is it, 50 something?
This is 50.
50. So you might want to add water with that.
Okay.
And I'd mentioned to you before we started, Sarah, about if you've got a pipette, but I don't know how many people keep pipettes at home. But the other thing you can use if you don't have a pipette is just a teaspoon.
Okay, I got a teaspoon.
So I'll show you. I'll show you firstly what I'll do then, just with a teaspoon, since you've got a teaspoon. So basically, I've just taken a very small piece of water, a few drips of water on the teaspoon. You just want to add a couple of drips. Remember, you can always add more water, but you can't take it out. And so you want to just add a couple of drips, and then see if that changes it. See if you like it better like that. And for some people, it's easier to drink, especially if it is like these ones, cask strength.
This one I think I liked actually better straight up.
Yeah.
This one here I liked better with ice and a little bit of water, but this one, I don't know, I liked it better straight up.
And then, so at some whiskey tastings, you'll get pipettes, or there's a lot of whiskey paraphernalia like this one, which is called an angel share dropper. So it's got a little angel on the top, and it's glass, and you kind of cover over your thumb at the top here. Okay. So you dip it, cover your thumb, and you get a little bit of water coming out.
So really, it's like chemistry. I mean, you really want to be sparing with the amount of water you add to get it to the place you like it. It's like salt. You don't want to add it all at once. You want to add it progressively.
Yeah. Oh. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Now this is a taste revelation, man. The blue cheese and the Scotch, really good combination. Pears would be good too with this.
Yeah.
Yum. All right. Let's see, I'm just double checking if there's any other questions. All right, so we have arrived, I think, at the strongest of the strong, right?
Yeah. Do you want to do one more? How are we doing for time?
Yes, let's do one more. What are we thinking?
Okay, so I think we're on about the hour mark. So again, a whiskey tasting, generally you would finish with the smokiest one or the peatiest one. So peat again is it's a product that is like similar to coal, but a few thousand years younger. So basically decomposed plants and trees that you dig up from the ground. In the Highlands of Scotland and also in Ireland, it was used for centuries for heating a home. So in Ireland, they often use the term of turf. So they put turfs on the fire. And so
Story about that for telling everybody someday after over drinks about the peat fire. My dad is from Ireland, and yeah, we had some adventures visiting people using peat fires and going to their peat bog, and that was not that long ago. Okay, so I'm putting a little hat on my glass.
Nice, yeah. So in this case we've got almost the same one. So mine is they're both from the Kilchoman distillery. So again, the CH is a ch. So Kilchoman. And it says on there that it's Isla's farm distillery. So that's because a lot of the distilleries in Isla are around the coast, whereas this one is on a farm, it's inland. And so they've came up with their sort of thing, their USP, unique selling position, is that what it is? Their unique thing that is that they're a farm distillery. So it's quite a new or newer distillery. Can't remember exactly what year it was started, but probably early 2000s.
All right, we lost
battery. Yeah, so it is a peated Isla, and so generally the style of Isla, a lot of people think that all Islas are peated, as we've just discovered in the last one with Brew Claddy. Not all are, but this one is. So yeah, peat is used in the malting process, and so when they're drying out the barley, so basically in the malting process, you're soaking the barley, makes the grain think it's about to be spring, it starts to produce a starch, and then you dry it out to stop that process so that we can keep the starch and we can use that to turn it into alcohol. So when you're drying it out, you're using peat on the fire, and that smokiness from the peat gets up and into the grain, and so that's how it gives it the smoky flavors. So we don't chuck lumps of peat into the whiskey, it's just through the smoke going through the barley that the flavor gets in there.
Oh, well, that's good to understand, because right now this glass smells like a house on fire. It really does. It smells like a forest fire. Those of us on the west coast of the United States know that smell. So
yeah.
Oh boy, that's oh boy, I gotta let Luca's standing by here. He's very curious because he's avoiding homework. Do you want to smell this one, Luca? I'd love to get the teen reaction to the smell to this one.
Yeah.
Okay, lean in. Ready? There you go.
Smells like the worst beef jerky you've ever had.
Yeah, so beef jerky, that's what he thinks it smells like.
Yeah.
Like beef jerky, but minus all the things that make good beef jerky.
See, for me, what this really smells like to me is this smells like my relative's house in Ireland, because when I was a kid and we went to stay with them, they still had peat fireplaces, and we went out to the peat bog and we cut peat. This is very nostalgic for me as a smell, because it smells like my dad's hometown.
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing about whiskey, is that it brings back memories for people as well with smells. So for me, I smell this and I think of summer's evening and I love Skye. So.
Oh, I love Skye. Skye, I have to say, is one of the few places I've ever been that I just felt like there was like some weird spiritual presence there. It was such a strange experience. I was walking along by myself, and I felt like there were people walking with me somehow. I can't explain it. It's such a beautiful place, really like connected to my heart somehow.
They say there's fairies in Isle of Skye.
Really?
There's a lot of fairies connected with Skye, yeah.
Huh. Yeah, it was a very strange feeling. It very, very much felt like you weren't alone somehow. Oh boy, yeah, that's.
So for me, this is one of the ones that I could spend a long time just nosing that. So I just think
Yeah, smelling it and not drinking it's probably a good plan. It smells like bacon now. I'm understanding Luca's point of view that it smells like burnt meat. It smells like burnt bacon.
Yeah.
It does smell like pork. Like I'm getting a real strong pork All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drop an ice cube in here and see if I like it anymore. What do you think? Am I gonna like it more with ice?
Probably, yeah. So it'll numb some of the flavors.
Thank God we can taste the Scotch less.
Actually, it is more pleasant with a little bit of ice.
Yeah.
Actually, quite a bit more pleasant. All right, I'm gonna try it with chocolate.
So again, that's not wrong. If you like it like that, drink it like that. Some people will sort of frown at that and say, oh no, you shouldn't put ice in a good single malt. But if it makes you enjoy it, why not? And then maybe little by little, you'll ease away from the ice and then start to discover more of the flavors.
Well, and the hilarious thing is I'm eating dark chocolate with this, and like the first 10 seconds I had the chocolate in my mouth, I couldn't taste the chocolate at all. Yeah, I think that this just killed all of my taste buds. I have killed all of the follicles in my nose, and I can't smell anything.
Yeah. So people often compare these ones as well to being like an antiseptic, or like we have in the UK TCP. I don't know if you have that. Kind of like sometimes very similar to, we call it surgical spirit. So like,
I was gonna say ammonia. It reminds me a little bit of ammonia.
Yeah, like cleaning alcohol.
But actually, the flavor with the little bit of chocolate and the ice, I think it's actually very pleasant now. The first pass was a little bit like, nope, but yeah, this is better, I think.
Yeah. So for me, I get like more of a sweet peat off of that. Sometimes it can be really, really kind of, I don't know, briny, sort of fishy. But for me, that's kind of sweet and kind of ripe, a lot of ripe notes and marzipan, I think.
I would say that this is significantly better than a Lefroy, because honestly, Lefroy is probably the worst thing I've ever tasted. And I've tasted a lot of things. For me, that was like way over the top, really unpleasant. This actually has some interesting, pleasant notes in it, I think. So, yeah.
There's almost like a maple thing going on there. Like, if you can taste it.
Luca says he tastes maple, but he didn't taste it. So it doesn't taste like maple.
It doesn't taste like
maple.
No, it tastes like licking a charred log.
I thought it's so a little sweet and like mapley.
Can you hand me your little sign? Luca's been off to the side and he handed me this sign. I've been wondering why he's been standing there, like observing us talking about Scotch. That's why he's trying to avoid doing it.
Can you bring this and betray me? Yeah.
Anyway, all right. This is fantastic.
What was your favorite one there?
My favorite one, I think I like the Springbank the most.
Springbank, yeah.
Which, I know is probably the least sophisticated of all of them, but I think of the ones that I tried tonight. But this with the ice, I actually do like. And I do like the complexity of it because it is more challenging. And I think that that's nice. It's nice to challenge your palate.
Yeah, so I would say that what you could do, I did have it somewhere here earlier, but I don't know where to put it. I had a whiskey book, and you get these things like a whiskey wheel, like the flavor wheel. So you can sometimes in a wheel or sometimes in a grid. So if you just Google whiskey flavor grid or wheel, you'd find a picture of it, and it places the different whiskies on the grid as to what sort of flavors, so more peaty or more sherried. Yeah. So you could look for the other ones that are closer to Springbank on the grid, and then that would be other ones that you could try that you might like. So yeah. I think generally that conception or misconception of people thinking, I like ones that are a certain colour. Now we know that it's not about that, but you can find other ones that are similar to Springbank and then continue the journey from there.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And somebody actually had asked the question, do you know of any ways to order a sampler? Are there any samplers available that you know of? Ways that you can not commit to, because each of these bottles often are over $50 a bottle. So how can you different Scotch whiskeys without
some liquor stores will hold some miniatures, but generally they'll be the quite commonly found ones, the ones that you get on airplanes, so Glenfiddich and Glenlivet and all that. I know that a lot of distilleries actually started doing sampler things during COVID when they couldn't host tastings in person. They started sending out little tasting packages, and then they would do a tasting over Zoom. So I don't know what the situation is with that in the US, but you might be able to find some that are like that.
Hey, let's look into that, Colin, and let's see if we can find something like that. We can post information about it later, because that's really cool. And maybe I can even see if I can contact some of those places to see about those kind of packages, even for during Christmas time or something, because that would be super fun. The reason I had to go borrow all of these is that I don't actually own any Scotch. I like whiskey and I like gin and things like that. So I don't actually own any of these. And it is a big financial commitment. I mean, the cheapest bottle of single malt Scotch I think you can buy here is at least $25. Is it about the same in New Zealand, or is it more? I bet it's more. Right?
Yeah, they start around, so it's around like probably 50 or 60 New Zealand dollars. That's probably about, 30, 35 US dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is a bit of a commitment. And the other thing that's a bit of a commitment is that some of these you may not necessarily like. So somebody had commented earlier that here in Seattle, there is a shop that does have, I can't remember the name. You can scroll back in the comments, but there is a shop here that specializes in that kind of thing. But I think in most cities.
There's one that I've been to in Seattle. I can't remember the name either now, but it's a real big shop. And I bought some whiskey when I was there a couple of years ago. But there's also a really good distillery in Seattle as well. I think it's Westland or Westlake, something like that. And they've actually produced a single malt. So it's like a Scotch style, but they're aging. I think they're aging in new barrel, I guess, because they have to. So they're aging in new barrels. But I really want to track that down. I tried to get it last time I was there. It was all sold out.
Oh, well, next time you come. You come next time, you and I will go on a Scotch excursion. We'll go and try and find all the good Scotches in Seattle. I think that's a good plan. Well, my friend, thank you so much for exploring all of these with us. And a question I don't actually know the answer to, but I was curious. Are you going to be doing any Scotland tours next year?
Any Scotland tours? We'll see what happens. It depends when I can go there without having to quarantine. So if I can go in maybe late summer, so maybe like September time, I might do. But I have set up previously some whiskey tours. So hopefully in future, maybe not next year, maybe in a couple of years' time.
And people can find your Scotland tours at Excursion Scotland, or is it Mondumo? Which is your website?
So now I'm using just Mondumo. So my brand originally in Scotland was Excursion Scotland, but now I'm trying to be non-country specific, and so I don't have to juggle over 2 or 3 different brands. So just everything's on Mondumo, Mondumo, Mondumo.com.
Cool. And if the travel situation improves, I think that you and I should do a little whiskey tour. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good.
All right, I'll be in Scotland then, my friend.
Yeah, that's it.
But before that, I'll see you in New Zealand. So, sláinte.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your expertise, Colin. I have learned a lot. I've really enjoyed it. A couple of just quick questions. Your Facebook page or website address, Mondumo, mondumo.com. And you can also find his Facebook page. I've tagged him actually in the previous post on my Facebook page, so you can find him that way. Or you can just put that into your browser to find his. So like him and follow him because he's always got fun things going on. And he's a Guide Collective member. So sláinte to Guide Collective. Yay. Yeah. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I thought that alcohol would be a really good theme of our week as we lead up to the election. So tomorrow we're going to continue the fun, but we're going to do an Italian-style drink fest. We're going to be joined by my friend Coral Sisk. I believe that we agreed on at 3:00 p.m. Seattle time tomorrow, so I'll put the time up in just a little bit. But you can certainly join us then, and we're going to learn how to mix a few Italian cocktails just to get us all mentally prepared for next Tuesday. So thanks a lot, Colin. I'll see you again soon.
Yep, I'll go back later, Sarah, and answer questions if anyone's got any more questions.
Yeah, please. If you have any more questions, post them on Facebook, and then Colin will get back to you. So have a good evening.
See you. Sláinte.